Okay, great. So, yes, welcome. How is the acoustics here? Are you able to hear me okay? Okay, 'cause up here it sounds like it's sort of hollow, but as long as you can hear me, that's what counts. So, yeah, so the subject of death, the subject of death. You know, I always like to tell people right away that this is not experiential, so you don't have to go worry about anything like that. But we're going to dive into the subject of death from a variety of perspectives, all from an esoteric orientation. So I'm going to be drawing from a lot of understanding found in theosophy and the writings of Alice Bailey. I think you'll find that we're going to veer into some really interesting areas. In fact, I want to first list to you some of the areas that we'll be covering throughout these 2 days. And hopefully you'll be able to walk away at the end of this workshop with a much, much deeper understanding of ways of understanding your journey, and not only just understanding death, but also understanding life. Because in a way, as I was creating this seminar some time ago, I really realized that, my goodness, how do we understand death unless we really understand what life is? Because actually life itself is quite an interesting mystery. And so we're going to look at what is life. And I think you'll find some big surprises. Let me just note some things that we're going to look at during this 2 days. We're going to be looking at what is called the death and its relationship to the so-called law of periodicity. We're going to be looking at the fear of death and what is the root of that? Where does that come from in the long journey of human evolution? We'll look at reincarnation. We'll look at karma. We're going to look at something called the eternal now. As I said, we're really going to focus on what is life as well. We're going to be looking at karma also from the point of view of how does it move from one incarnation to the next. We're going to look at the physics of the movement of karma. And I think you'll find that to be quite interesting. And we're going to be looking at the difference between heaven, Devachan, and nirvana. Heaven, Devachan, and nirvana. We'll also be looking at the sequence of death. How does the soul, what is the preferred process, let's say, of the soul as it begins to abstract itself from the form? And how does that differ according to where you are on the path? So we'll look at that. We're going to look at actually something called the second death. After every death, there's always a second death. And so we'll explore what that's all about. We're also going to be looking at techniques of dying, and also methods that can help you and I to prepare for our own death. So how does that sound? Pretty good? Is that okay? We've got quite a bit to cover. Okay, so let's dive into it. You know, it's interesting because death in this philosophy is viewed as an interlude between two activities. An interlude between two activities. You know, it is said that the lower self, the personality, is governed by the great law of activity, while the soul is governed by the law of attraction. So when we look at personality as the thing that is dying away, we can kind of get a sense of why would we say that it's an interlude between two activities. It's an interlude between two outer active expressions of the life. But it's a necessary interlude because every interlude is a place where great insight and absorption of wisdom occurs. You'll see as we go through this that death is understood as a necessary step to integrate the wisdom that has been garnered throughout the many years of the incarnation and integrate it into your soul nature or your causal body, so that in a way it's your causal body, your soul nature, that is evolving, and it needs that time between incarnations to integrate the wisdom experienced through the lessons learned in the life. So it's an interlude between two activities. In a way you could say, to look at it more simply, think of death as not a period but a comma. It's not a period but a comma, okay? And it's something that unfortunately in Western societies there's a tendency to not want to speak about it. It's amazing that it's something that is just gets your attention as you sort of get old and approach death, and suddenly it becomes an important thing. But actually it's something that would be well for us to understand in the dynamics of life throughout life. And so we're going to, I think you're going to find that there's value, even if you're very young, in understanding what the death process is for each of us. So we're going to be looking at that. And we're also going to be focusing on, as I say, practical things that you can do to actually become more effective in preparing for your own death. So it's actually, according to the Tibetan, by the way, do you all know who I mean when I say the Tibetan? The author of the Alice Bailey writings is actually a great Tibetan master. And so if you hear me say the word Tibetan, I'm referencing him. He says this about death. He says, it's the most practiced thing you've ever done. The most practiced thing we've ever done. So, and we will fully explore that. All right, now you also have handouts given to you, is that right? Yes. And one of the things you're going to see in the packet is there's going to be a packet of a stapled handout that says quotations potentially used in the seminar. Yes. Throughout these 2 days, you want that one handy because these are all the possible quotations that I might put up here and discuss with you. We're certainly not going to cover all of them. So I decided the solution was give you copies of all of them as potentials, all right? Yeah. So kind of have that off to the side available for yourselves. All right, so let's dive into it. To begin, big picture here, big picture. There's something called the law of periodicity that I want to explore with you. So it's a great cosmic law. You know, we're told that there are three, the highest laws of creation are relevant to everything, and the second law is called the law of periodicity. It's also called the law of cycles, and it has to do with great in-breaths and out-breaths. And so let's explore that for a minute, and I've got an overhead that I want to show you regarding this. So let me kind of get that over there, and we'll just open it up here. So, first thing, understand that in this philosophy it's understood that there's only one life, only one entity, one reality. We might call it God or Brahma, whatever you want to call that. But that one life, for reasons we can't understand, manifests itself from subjectivity to objectivity, from subtlety to density, and that the whole universe is actually the externalization of the consciousness and the beingness of a greater entity. But that within that one great externalization there are multiple lesser entities incarnating within it. So that you and I are a unit of consciousness, but we are each units within a larger category of consciousness. Humanity itself is an entity with a soul and a personality. The earth itself is an entity with a soul and a personality. The solar system itself is an entity with a soul and a personality. And each goes through this great law of periodicity, great out-breath and in-breath, an out-breath and an in-breath. And so that's what we're looking at here. Let me show you the next slide here. I wonder if it's just by hitting this will it go? Nope. So the first cycle of the out-breath is called the Manvantara. And so everything breathes out first from subjectivity to objectivity. And for a human being, that manifests as incarnation. But for the solar logos, that's the entity that ensouls the whole solar system, that represents the manifestation of the solar system, its incarnation. What we see as the outer solar system is simply understood as the physical body of that entity. But by the way, that entity has an emotional body, has a mental body, has a causal body. It's constitutionally just like you and I. But it's a great, great out-breath, a Manvantara. Then following that is the next phase, And that's called a pralaya. That's the in-breath. Manvantara and pralaya. Breathing out and breathing in. And it's the pralaya phase of any cycle is always the indrawing phase. It's movement from matter to spirit, from density to subtlety. And that's what death is. Death is a manifestation of pralaya. Now, sometimes when you read the esoteric literature, you'll see the word maha pralaya, or you'll see the word maha manvantara. Maha means great. So oftentimes when we think of the solar system and its out-breath and its in-breath, that's called a maha manvantara and a maha pralaya. These are just amplifications of the idea. Okay? So always there's this breathing process that's going on. Now, so we see the full cycle here. We see the full cycle. But now what's interesting about this is that let's look at this and pretend that this is the solar logos for a minute. We're looking at it. Then the next phase is that there are cycles within cycles. Cycles within cycles. All right? So, in other words, as a life expression breathes out, there will be an inner breath before it. It's like this, okay? And so there are times for you in your life when you're, let's say this is you. Let's say this is you. There are times when your consciousness is really, really attending to being active in the world and really getting out there. And there are other times when you're still in incarnation, but you're a little bit more withdrawn. You're kind of looking for retreat. So that's a smaller pralaya within the greater manvantara called incarnation. You see? So cycles within cycles. Cycles within cycles. And let me just show you one more step here. And then so you have cycles within cycles within cycles. So for instance, right now you're in an incarnation. You're in incarnation. You're in a manvantara. But tonight, when you fall asleep, you will go into a mini pralaya. Sleep is a mini pralaya. It's a process of abstraction. Okay? Process of abstraction. After the same might it's probable that you might have a mini pralaya just after lunch today. That's a possibility too. So kind of get used to this idea of cycles within cycles within cycles. It's rooted in the whole thing. Rooted in the whole thing. All right. Now, by the way, what I'm going to do in terms of questions, I know that throughout the day you may have questions, but what I'd like to do is speak a little while, then open it up. So if you could hold on, after each section I will stop. And so let me just ask, is there anything you'd like clarity on this before I move on? Anything you'd like to clarify?
It's not about this, it's about what you said earlier. You said death is about integrating what we've learned in the previous incarnation.
Yeah.
Why is it then when we reincarnate we forget who we really are?
Okay. That one we're going to hold on to because we're going to get into that whole process a bit later, okay? So let's hold on to that question. Any other that more related to this that you'd like to ask? Okay. All right. Well, then let's get into, let's go on to this. I want you to also think about death not just in terms of your own ending, but think about death as just that, endings. Endings. Because this is also applicable to larger living systems. The rise and fall of civilizations, for instance, is a great out-breath and an in-breath. You see? The manifestation of a solar system. What is a black hole anyway? You ever wonder about that from an esoteric point of view? A black hole is believed in the esoteric world to be the full abstraction into Mahapralaya of a solar entity. That where a black hole is where a a deity, which is to say a solar logos, a star, existed, but has gone into such abstraction that all the laws of physics collapse at that depth of dimensional abstraction, you see? So it is, I guess what I'm saying is I want you to think about death beyond just your individuality. I'd like you to think about it also as a cycle, for instance, the death of a relationship. You go through, relationships often go through these cycles. That's, the ending of a job, the ending of a career. Many of the same principles are present there as well. Things go through cycles of, the out-breath is often filled with activity, building, maturation. Then there's the cycle of aging, crystallization, and endings. But it's always, what ends is not the essence, but what ends is the form that the essence has brought forth. One of the great challenges we face, hello, is this. We tend to look at death in an upside-down fashion. And one of the great challenges of our evolution is to start to see it right side up. So for instance, as a good example, let's say there's a carcass right here. You see a dead body. The personality, the lower self's immediate reaction to that, it defines that. And the personality will define that, and it will say, my goodness, that person lost their life. That's not correct. That person didn't lose their life. They lost their form, but not their life. That's really critical to keep in mind, because that's the kind of upside-down perspective that I'm talking about. But we automatically say and think they lost their life, you see? Life is and always has been. But form comes and goes. Form comes and goes. So much of the esoteric philosophy is suggesting that we have to reverse our thinking about things. What we think is cause is actually an effect and not a cause. Even science will say, okay, consciousness. Science says that consciousness is the product of form. The more complexity and development of your neurology and your biology, the more capacity human beings have for higher states of consciousness. But esotericism will say, no, consciousness is not fundamentally the product of form, it's actually the other way around. Consciousness is, and form is the outer garment that is manifesting in support of that consciousness, you see? Another reversal. What's cause and what's effect? What's cause and what's effect? So these are things that I'd like you to kind of hold as we go through this today. Now, keep in mind that if we're going to really think about this, we need to think about what is the function of the personality and what is and its relationship to the soul. Because it's the soul in us that is moving from one incarnation to the next incarnation to the next incarnation. So what's the function of the personality? Well, it's the outer garment for the soul. It's the outer instrument used by the soul to interact with the world. And that personality has three components to it, a mental, emotional, and physical component. But each of those are just sheaths of substance, layers of intelligent substance. And the soul is utilizing that outer three-layered thing called personality to interface with the world and ultimately more effectively serve the world. It needs an outer instrument that can think. It needs an outer instrument that can feel. It needs an outer instrument that can be effective in a physical way. And each incarnation, the goal is for the soul to actually develop more capacity to do that. More capacity to express itself through the mental body of the personality, through the emotional body of the personality, through the physical body of the personality. But it's a struggle because that lower self thinks it's an independent agent. That lower self believes that it's on its own. It doesn't know that it's just an appendage. That's all it really is. And so much of the path has to do with teaching the lower self that it's just a servant and an outer garment. And it has to be purified at the same time that it has to yield to the soul's agenda. And when there's full purification of the lower self, and there's full capacity of the soul to express itself through that lower self, that's enlightenment. That's enlightenment. And it's at that point, what we call the fourth initiation, where there's no necessity to incarnate anymore. In other words, why is there incarnation at all? It's because spirit is gradually trying to find ways of expressing itself through the form and establishing right relationship with form. And each incarnation facilitates a further step in that direction. You could look at it this way. What's the purpose of incarnated life? It is to gradually actualize or externalize, to actualize the soul's full nature through form. And when that is, it's a process of incrementally bringing spirit into form and fully achieving that. The day is one. The day is one. And that's when you're called a master. And that's what a master is. A master who has mastered his or her instrumentation. It's not about following a guru like we think. Oh, a master is somebody that's got a bunch of devotees. Nonsense. That's not what a master is. It's an indwelling self. It's a spiritual entity that has succeeded in the great challenge of expressing the fullness of its nature through form without that form being an encumberment at all. That's the goal. Does that make sense to all of you? Okay.